Hi everyone, so today's video is on a topic that I think is a somewhat of a one that never gets contested almost, and sometimes it's nice to actually look at some research and see, do I agree with that? So recently I've been looking actually at the diets of what I would say is probably the most popular, well, second most popular genus within Loricariidae, Hypancistrus, so that's plecos. And this is Hypancistrus. They can reach large prices, they can have stunning colours, there's hybrids available, and while they don't come in that many different colour variants, they do come in sort of a very striking, usually white, black, but there is variations in that, and it can be striped or spotted. So why is it that maybe we don't know so much as we thought we did about them? And I think there's way too many different sort of answers why. I don't think there's sort of one thing. But maybe half of the issues, when you look at food brands for Hypancistrus, a lot of them will suggest, say, for plecos, for carnivorous plecos. But do they really reflect the wild diet of these fishes? And many still are captive bred. Although this genus is very easy to breed in captivity, sometimes it can be just more economical to wild catch. And that is going to be a big factor. Although just because something is captive bred doesn't mean it has lost that evolution. It might have lost the gut factor, and that is probably a really a problematic thing. But it's really not a science that I guess a lot of fish keepers are made aware of, the actual bacteria within the gut and on the slime coat. But other than that, you've got things like the actual shape of the gut, size of the gut. It can take many generations for these to change. Also jaw morphology, so jaw shape is very important. So Hypancistrus in the wild, if you look at the literature, largely feeds on detritus, algae and very little insect larvae, and they're generally described as feeding on ulfwurch. Ulfwurch is periplankton, so it's sort of a matrix of different organisms, usually biofilms, algae, protozoa, sponges. And I think maybe this is why we look at Hypancistrus, and a lot of people maybe don't really recognise what these fishes might eat in the wild. And it's a really difficult topic because a lot of people very strongly will say they're carnivores. And if you look at the diets, they're not carnivores. Omnivores is a really difficult thing to say. So if we look at the diets of Loricariidae and plex in general, this paper is really good sort of, I guess, basis for the actual diet. So this is Trophic Diversity in the Evolution and Community Assembly of Loricariid Catfishes. This was written by Nathan Lujan, Kirk Winemiller and Jonathan Armbruster, and this was published in BMC Evolutionary Biology, and this was published in 2012. So if we actually look at the paper, it goes through a variety of things. That's the abstract. But if we scroll a little bit down, here it lists what sort of the basis of Loricariid diets. Detritus is the most is the basis for most ecosystems and food webs within freshwater fishes, and that's really where a lot of the nutrients comes from, because if you think how freshwater works, a lot of it is sort of riverine habitats and nutrients is generally just coming in from terrestrial sources. But then you've got diversity of algae, bacteria, protozoas, stuff like that. So it's a really complex sort of thing, but detritus is sort of the basis for many ecosystems, and this means that detritivorous fish, as stated, are diverse and abundant. and this means it can support commercial fisheries, and generally when we're talking about ornamental. So it would be, sometimes it's logical to suggest that the majority of loricariids would feed on such a resource, and if we look here, this lists the sort of diversity and also the diversity of jaws. So this would be something like, I guess that's a Chaetostoma, Chaetostoma. This could be a panac, and this is sort of a Leprocanthus, I'd assume. So yeah, I think, yep, that's about actually it, because mouth shapes are quite diverse, and this is so they can sort of partition their niche within what they're feeding. But obviously you've got carnivores, you've got specialist herbivores, and they're all sort of partitioning this niche. And if we look at the diversity of mouths, let's scroll up. So if we look at, oh, where's Hypancistrus? Is there no Hypancistrus? So here is Hypancistrus. You've got that sort of smaller dental plates, and no, that's Pecotia, isn't it? No, it is Hypancistrus. And then you've got this long sort of maxillary barbel. And then, yeah, so you can see it's very similar actually to, well, I think it's very similar to Panac, Panaculus. Well, Panac may be lesser, and that's probably more convergence. They're not actually closely related. Where's Panac? Oh, Panac, there. And that's only when you look at dentistry, they're not actually that similar, but, and also Panaculus. Panaculus sometimes is added into Panac, but it's not phylogenetically. And Pecotia, and I think this is due to they sort of shared niche almost, and you can see where they place. And I'm probably not explaining it the best. So here we got a summary of diets known at the time, I assume, entirely. So Hypancistrus and Spectre, which is the only Hypancistrus listed. Actually, this is based on gut content, so that doesn't mean the fish is actually digesting it. Notice down here, and I've made previous videos, and there's plenty of scientific literature on it. Wood is listed as gut contents for Panac, and Panac was given Panac nocturnus, Panac macaque, Panac nomus, and Panac dentex, and Panac albomaculatus. They are all Panaculus. So, but taxonomy does change, and sometimes scientific papers might be published and then the taxonomy changes, and it's like, oh no. But here you can see Hypancistrus and Spectre, gut contents, detritus, algae, and seeds. And actually I've got the description here. So this is Hypancistrus and Spectre. So this is a sort of reasonably commonish species, and this is the actual description. So this is available on ResearchGate. So this was described by Jonathan Armbruster in 2002. So this is before that other paper was published in Copeia. Or I think that's how you'd say it. So if I scroll down, it's got some lovely photos just to help you identify the species and sort of the diagnosis. So this is what the actual species is described on. And sometimes they do include this passage on ecology, and it can be really useful. Sometimes it's in discussion and other things. Sometimes you have a sort of a notes area. But here's ecology. So it's collected from rocks and rapids. So this is sort of a very high flow environment that the fish will inhabit. And gut contents reveal that in addition to algae and detritus, Hypancistrus and Spectre consume seeds. Dicotyledonous seeds, I know the word, but when it's split up it's not helpful at all, were separated into two cotyledons, while monocotyledon seeds were partially crushed. So this shows that maybe this fish is actually, I never really read this bit beforehand, that they actually are adapted to sort of break down these seeds, because it crushes these. So monocots are sort of like grasses, and that's as far as I get with them. Dicots is not actually a phylogenetic sort of thing, dicots and monocots, but it's sort of a way of categorizing plants. and these ones are split. So that's sort of a mechanical way of breaking down food, and this might explain why these fish have that sort of longer snout that you do see in Scobian Ancistrus and Leprocanthus. They're very good for very well designed for breaking down some mollusks. This longer snout can manoeuvre, and the sort of shorter jaws are quite good at that. And then, so I'm just going to go over the next description. So this is 4 new species, also described in Copeia 2007. And this is Jonathan Armbruster, Nathan Lujan, and Donald Taphorn. And this is 4 new species, as I said, from Venezuela. Or the Amazon in Venezuela. So it's got a lovely picture of all 4 of these. And if I scroll down, not all of these, as you'll see, include the actual diet ecology. So this one is Hypancistrus, inspector. So this is a lovely, another spotted one. You sort of even get spots or stripes with Hypancistrus. It's actually a really striking fish, especially when juveniles. And if we scroll down, you've got sexual dimorphism generally. You can assume on that. But, where is it? Ecology. So here it's got the anterior few centimetres, contained a brown organic and inorganic matrix interspersed with strands of filamentous algae. So that's kind of all for which periplankton, sort of, that's what it kind of makes you think of. Most individuals were collected on the dry season in cracks in bedrock, exposed to slight or moderate flow. So, what we define as slight and moderate in the aquarium trade is nothing like what you probably see in a river. So I think it's important when it comes to that sort of thing, maybe to provide a little bit more flow than you might think. So I've seen a lot of people say, my tank's too high flow, and you think, you've got fish that probably are in water you could barely stand up in. But yeah, so if you, that's kind of going off the point. But so then it states here, heterogeneous mixture of fine organic matter. So that's kind of detritus, cyanobacteria, green algae, diatoms. That's another type of algae. They're coated in a silicate base sort of shell. Hence why if you reduce silicates, you generally affect the diatoms. And aquatic insects, and they say here Ulfwich. So here, so it is a lot of algae and detritus, and I'd assume this mixture would be in what is the largest amount. So they do consume insects, but the amount of it and what insect. So it's likely to be sort of insect larvae. I doubt they're actually including here stuff like bryozoa. For this, they might be found in a different part to where these fish were collected. Bryozoa, also sort of sponges, stuff like that. But it's also seasonal. Sponges are probably a bit more deeper water, but actually no, you do get sponges more higher up, but really, they do depend on the amount of sediment in the water. So, but you do see them in the Zingu, which is quite a clear water. And then, so, what's it? So then it says, and organic sediment cover most of the rocks, and organic sediment I think is really important to recognise. A lot of these fish will be found with sediment, sand in their gut, and it potentially has a mechanical benefit within the fish. So I do always like to provide a soft sand of some kind. It doesn't have to be a thick layer, it's fine, but I think it could be beneficial. And it's more the could be rather than it is. And it says omnivorous consumer of Ulfwich. So if we scroll down, you'll see here, this is Hypancistrus debilitera. I can never pronounce some of these. And this doesn't actually list because this is so these were collected from slight to moderate flow, and they were not examined for the gut, but it does say on many of these that it's similar to other loricariids mentioned. So here again, purchased the guts of the 2 specimens were examined but empty due to being in a sort of a captive environment for a period of time. This does happen, especially when shipping fish. It's a good idea to sort of purge the gut a little bit, just so it's not producing so much waste. So here's finally Hypancistrus lurinarum's probably better, there's no I. And then if we go down, a list here, the guts of the guts of one individual contain small pieces of moss, bryozoa. So these are probably very easy to digest plants. Well, they are. They're not sort of very high in sort of a lot of the the compounds, the carbohydrate. Sort of the compounds that sort of make plants really structurally strong. And a lot of aquatic plants also don't contain so much of these. And this makes it a little bit easier to digest. Filamentous algae and sand grains. So the same, sand grains. And again, this one only contains sand grains and clay. So this does hint that the fish, so obviously definitions of omnivorous, herbivorous is really difficult to sort of define when it comes to aquatic organisms. These fish are eating a lot of algae, and algae are not the same as plants. They're not the same as cereals that you get in a lot of diets. These are high in vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and also they're higher in protein and different proteins. Different proteins come from different sources. And just because it might list on a diet that's higher in our protein than another, it doesn't mean it's got the same proteins. Proteins are built from amino acids, and there are a lot of different amino acids out there. I believe you sort of get more common ones, but the different sources do vary, and they are important. Of course, a small amount of insects, and these would likely be, as I said, aquatic invertebrate larvae, so insect larvae, would be beneficial. Of course, when it comes to sort of bacterial films, you can't really replicate it to the same standard in the aquarium, but algae you really can, and I think they provide a lot of benefit, especially if you provide a diverse selection of algae. And I think the mouth, if I scroll up to a photo, the mouth of, and that's probably not the one that would be most sort of to explain. Oh. Okay, yeah. So the mouth is kind of long, but it's very much like its sort of sister, well, a branch very close to it, and that's Pecotia or Pecotia. It's got this sort of larger lip, smaller, so this is the dentary, and this is the premaxillary. Up there, you can't really see it on this fish. They are smaller, but doesn't make it carnivorous. There is a lot of many teeth in the sort of small area, opposed to carnivorous species which tend to have long teeth in a very sort of small area, but the teeth are longer and there's not as many, whereas this is a lot of teeth in a smaller area. So this doesn't mean that I would say it probably hints that it's more eating on detritus rather than scraping for algae, as you see in Ancistrinae with their large jaws. Let's get up, if I get up the paper, Lujan, let me quickly pause this. So it's back on the Nathan Lujan's paper. Well, it's got obviously Winemiller and Armbruster as well, but the 2012 paper. So if you look here, opposed to sort of, so that's Ancistrinae, and you can see these very large groups of teeth, and many of them. I would say maybe this hints at the fish eating maybe more algae than actually scraping on the rocks, opposed to having more detritus. Maybe potentially more sponges, something a little bit more coarse to eat. And you see this also in many Ancistrinae. and Chaetostoma. Actually, Lichthosis, I believe, is slightly more omnivorous. Is it more? I forget so much so easily. And then if we go up, if you look at Lepidocanthus, it's really difficult to see, and Pseudocanthus, these are both like full-on carnivores, and Ancistrus as well. But the teeth are, I don't know. Those teeth actually, but if you look, so this is the carnivorous Lepidocanthus, and Lepidocanthus is named because of, now I forget the category that includes rabbits, but these two front teeth. And that's really a sort of a very different dental structure to Hypancistrus. This is Chaetostoma, and this is generally an algivore. You can look at that, and that's really scraping. So I guess what we say is an omnivore maybe is more of an Ulfwurch periplankton, whereas herbivorous species specialising more on algae and stuff like that. It's really difficult to generalise, because when it comes to freshwater, you've got stuff like sponges, and where do you classify them? Where do you classify Bryza? I know they're animals, but they're not the same sort of things as eating insects. And you've also got other things, sort of like rotifers, protozoa. Protozoa are animals. They're not animals. I'm just trying to remember no, they're not animals, but they're similar. Blimey, it's been a while since I've done a lot of some major play stuff. They're not animals. Where do you place them? Obviously there's terms for some things, but it really makes it really difficult to generalise. So it's really worth looking at papers and seeing, how can I replicate this best? Obviously sponges can't really be grown properly in captivity, and other things like that. It does make it difficult. And if you look at the body shape, this is very similar to Pecoltia. And do we actually have, because these, they do look like they might be live specimens. I don't think so. There is, the closest we've got to Pecoltia is the Hypancistrus, but it is quite similar. So it's quite stumpy like Pecoltia, and it's why people probably confuse them a lot. They're very similar, and even I know their dietary morphology is different, but it's similar. And I think Pecoltia does get confused a lot with being, I guess it gets shoved in the carnivore category, and both of these do. So what does this say really about Hypancistrus diets? And I think Pecoltia can be involved in this. Well, to be honest, it says they're omnivores, but what we treat as omnivores probably isn't the true omnivory. A lot of diets don't contain that many algae, and this is probably a flaw more than anything. And I think when it comes to Hypancistrus, feeding them a lot more variety of algae, and the actual algae themselves in an accessible way. Alternatively, you could go to using vegetables, but they don't contain, as I said, the same amount of vitamins, minerals, nutrients. They can be a sort of, I guess, a behavioural stimulation, because if you're feeding these things, the fish have to rasp off it, almost like they would rasp off these algae in the wild. So I'm just watching I think my discus are spawning, and it's a different pair this time, which is a bit like, oh great. Getting sidetracked. So the definition of omnivore though, an omnivore in our sort of terms is something that eats a mixture, but when we look at mammals, no mammal that is an omnivore has a sort of a straight mix, a 50-50. So generally, if you look at humans, we do eat a lot of so we eat obviously meat, but we also will focus on a wider variety of plants, because what is available to us and what we're in the terrestrial environment, there's a lot of plants compared to aquatic, there's a lot less. So that's what we feed on. Obviously there's fruits, berries, stuff like that as well. Also, roots and whatever, but they're all parts of plants. But so there is a sort of, every time I look around in this room there's something, and I think there's a snail in the room because I've just seen snail tracks on one of my plants, and I have no idea where it's come from because I don't keep African land snails anymore, and that's way too small of a trail for African land snails. Well, they're adults. So maybe we need to actually start researching the wild diets of these fishes, and this is sometimes why I recommend the brands I do, just because of I hate the repetitiveness of most brands. You can almost copy and paste a lot of the ingredients over, and that means that you're not providing the same amount of variety as you could otherwise. It is easier to provide a variety of insects and invertebrates through frozen food and live foods, opposed to, okay, I don't think that's a pair. Looks like that female's just laying, and the male, that's not his female. The male doesn't seem to care less. It's a bit, oh God knows. I don't want them spawning. So what was I saying? Oh, I keep getting sidetracked. Okay, now he wants to spawn with his actual female. What the hell? Cichlids are drama. They never know quite what they're doing. So generally, feeding, when it comes to algae, it's a lot more difficult to replace this, especially in captivity, and I need to review New Life Spectrum properly, and I need to actually do some real research, because although it contains a lot of algae, I don't think that's the entire secret to getting fish feeding on it, because when you actually look at it, the fish don't actually eat it, opposed to say Hypancistrus, which does have a lot of algae and a lot of nutrition, a lot of other ingredients that are really worth feeding. So I think there's a lot more to it, and I do assume fish do prefer to feed on something that is a lot more like a surface, if you get what I mean, opposed to wafers. And I have noticed this when you first import fish from the wild, they don't quite know what to do with wafers. They're a bit like, because I think they don't really quite know how to lift up and just feed on something like a little pellet sort of thing. So obviously, like something like Hypancistrus is really good, but it's getting the right diet. And part of why I believe that people might have issues is not because it's a rubbish diet, sorry, nearly bad language there, not because it's a bad diet. It's because when you know when something's rich and it's the wrong diet, that's when you might actually notice issues rather than long term having issues. And I think while a lot of the repetition of most diets will cause malnutrition, malnutrition does tend to take a while to take effect. And generally you might not always see the effect. Maybe sperm count might be down, maybe the eggs aren't as viable. Maybe other things. Obesity obviously is a type of I think it's a type of malnutrition, it would be. So there's other things at play there. So I'm saying so much. But when it comes to richer diets, obviously I say, so it's like when you feed, if you're feeding the wrong diet and it's a rich diet, maybe that's when the issues occur. So take feeding someone with lactose intolerance, obviously they're going to have an issue. So a diet that is so rich in what the fish should be digesting, but actually doesn't in the wild, if you get what I mean, it would probably cause issues. So that's why I've kind of changed my stance on and actually looked more into it, and I actually think that for Hypancistrus I would actually more focus on Soylent Green, and for my herbivores I feed Soylent Green and Super Green, but mostly Soylent Green just for the algae. For Hypancistrus they do eat a lot of algae and detritus, as these papers show, but they do feed a little bit on inverts, and you could probably cater for that with frozen foods, maybe some other dry foods, but a lot of dry foods I don't think actually cater for carnivores either. They contain a lot of cereals and stuff like that, which is also a problem. But you could, but Hypancistrus green does have a few invertebrates, and I do think why I've never had an issue with it with the herbivores is because in the wild they probably would pick on a few, and in Hypancistrus I think those algae are really what we need, and a lot of wild ducks we can't always entirely cater for in captivity yet. If there was more technological advancements with food, developing different techniques to actually farm different things. I'd love to see someone work how to farm sponges. That would be amazing, and I would buy ducks that actually do probably have sponges in rather than and actual freshwater sponges would be brilliant. I'd love to see different algae, obviously bearing in mind what fish I feed, and also I think generally for the hobbyist side, always looking into the wilder and maybe catering a little bit towards that little itty bitty niche that species or genus feeds on. So if you've got, say, Scopian and Ancistrus leprocanthus, feed a carnivorous diet high in insects, invertebrates, but also feed snails and stuff like that, mollusks. And I do find, interestingly, a lot of people actually say they find they have issues with bloat if leprocanthus aren't fed herbivorous foods, and I think the problem is a lot of diets do not actually contain insects, they contain fish meal, and insects actually contain something called chitin. Chitin is the sort of casing, the exoskeleton, well, what makes up part of the exoskeleton of insects. And that probably does have a mechanical basis. So the leprocanthus is getting bloat on something like fish or krill meal. Also other those sort of meals that are marine based. That might be due to the fish actually not having that mechanical way of processing it. Also, they might not actually be able to process fish themselves or krill that well. When they say they feed to plants, a lot of plants contain cellulose. Cellulose and lignin, stuff like that, could be providing, say, the alternative for helping break down these foods. And in my opinion, a lot of carnivorous diets are a lot more difficult to break down than herbivorous, omnivorous diets, because of just the sake of them being insects. So the ability, if you have substrate in there, that probably does have a mechanical benefit. Other things to say about Hypancistrus before I finish. Hypancistrus do well in high flow tanks. This gets forgotten sometimes, but they also do well at higher temperatures. A lot of them, including L236 and stuff, do need something like 28 degrees centigrade minimum. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. And then this does mean you will need to provide extra source of oxygen, whether it be in air. So if you're using a Hamburg Matten filter, that's fine. If you're using it external, I've got these Venturis. So a lot of my fish are high flow, high temperatures as well. This plant is going to get in the way. It's just a cheap Monstera AF, I forget the name, but obviously sold as Ancistrinae, and I'm grateful for one cutting in now, it's really big. But yes, this is just a Venturi stuck onto the external filters, and that provides extra oxygenation. I also use power heads. Obviously on small tanks you probably wouldn't need as much of this sort of circulation. That sort of pushes the oxygen back and along the bottom, which is where most of the fish will be, at the bottom of the tank. So I think that care is really important. The Hypancistrus are actually really hardy despite the price. Hypancistrus zebra and stuff like that, they're not actually... Oh no, have I got two pair? I've got 3 discus trying to spawn with 1 male. I have no idea what's happening. Particular drama. So really, they are hardy. The prices can be really high. L236, which is likely a hybrid. L173, I'm not sure, but I think quite a few of the ones available are. They're a lot more hardier, and the price tag is quite, actually, I would say, if you're wanting to get into breeding, go for Hypancistrus. They're not badly sized, so maximum about 15 centimetres standard length. And they're a lot more easier with diet. They can cope with the general commercial diets. Generally, but if you want something a little bit better, I would go really looking at the wild duck and then comparing captive ducks and try and sort of matching that a little bit. So they are a lot easier than, say, Ancistrus. Most Ancistrus are a complete nightmare. Don't even try. Excluding the common bristlenose Ancistrus AF cirrhosis, CF cirrhosis, often missold as Ancistrus teminici. That's not a bad pronunciation of it. I don't know how to pronounce it. What's other names? Ancistrus SP, Ancistrus. Don't confuse with other SPs. There's plenty, because there's plenty of undescribed. So they're a lot more easier going Pecculture as well, but they're not as easier to breed. They tend to be a bit more seasonal. Although if you want long-lasting, striking coloration, Pecculture comp to have to win that. Hypancistrus do go a bit grey out with age. And as they're odontodes, these external teeth grow in males. They do sort of, it sort of blurs their appearance a little bit more. But Pecculture does add a bit more variation, and I think this whole group is brilliant if you're just wanting to start out, but still get their requirements right. What else? They're pretty much easy going. High temperatures, not too many fast feeders, no African cichlids, they're just out competed. Stuff like that. Also not too small tanks. I wouldn't keep them in 10 litres, 9 litres, stuff like that. Breeding is it can be a little bit more varied. But generally don't be afraid of the price. They're pretty hardy and pretty easy going. Both of them are Panacus as well, but Panacus, unless you get the sort of Panacus macus and that sort of dumpier shape, is it Panaphilus? That sort of subgenre, clade, they're quite easy going, that whole Pecculture lot. So if you're looking at starting out, they're pretty much the most easygoing of the lot. And there is a price range. You could get some of the more common species, L66, L333, the Queen Arabesque, L201, you could get them quite cheap. L201 I would be wary, make sure it is L201 and not L142. L142 will be a lot more demanding and a much larger fish with a different diet. But generally if you research you'll see the difference. But there's so much diversity, and you don't have to splash out on the Hypancistrus there, but it is a money maker, I guess, to a degree. But there's so many out there, and it doesn't really have the entire rare factor because there is so many out there. And also research standard length, not total length. They're not as tiny. When you see them in shops, they are babies. You probably won't be able to sex them, but I've got a video on breeding anyway. So I'll finish before I talk any more. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll make more videos. It depends how I feel at the moment and whether I have stuff to talk about. I do need to make a video maybe more similar to this on the Detritivores, Panacus, Panac, Hyposmus that were in the Cotyledon genus, what else, Ancistrus, Hedrocanthicus, but then I think most Ancistrus actually have been researched to be that sort of Detritivores, and they're all detritivores, I'd say, although they're very similar to Ancistrus, but then Ancistrus is so varied. And that's sort of it. I've got videos planned, but it's actually doing them, and some I kind of want to do shop tours, but then that's really like nerve-wracking. So I'll see you anyway. Thank you for watching.